How you doing? This is the Concern Forum. I'm Bob Gumbs. Today I have a great guest, gentleman, Mr. Herb Boyd, a writer, a journalist, an educator, an activist. I mean, look, the list goes on and on. This gentleman has a couple of books here today, one about the Black Panthers and one about a hero of mine, Malcolm X. Mm-hmm. Now, before I get into that, just let me briefly do a quick piece of housekeeping here. One of the things about being a host of a talk show, as I'm learning, is that no host should deny that he has his own personal views on things, but I will always be careful to not mix my views with the facts of the, particular issue involved. And the Concern Forum will always try to live up to that standard. Well, one other thing I want to say, and this is the purpose of the Concern Forum, and I don't mean to get, language, dramaticus or anything of that nature, but a little Shakespearean. When I'm thinking in terms of Julius Caesar. I believe it's Cassius to Brutus when he says, "The fault, dear Brutus, lies not in our stars, but with ourselves." Mm-hmm. If you see it, if you don't like the direction that our politics is going in, then you have an obligation to get involved or don't complain. Now, Mr. Boyd, Brother Boyd.
A little Shakespeare there, huh?
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed.
Wonderful.
Yeah, I'm looking at those two books.
Sure.
And I have to admit, I haven't had the opportunity to read those two books. Mm-hmm. I have read, I think everybody's read, in the civilized world, I hope, Malcolm's autobiography. Mm-hmm. And I lived at the time, both with Malcolm and of the Black Panthers. Slight confession, the Panthers on Lenox Avenue back in the 60s, mm-hmm. There was the time when I used to run errands for them, the guys there. Uh-huh. So these are two subjects that are both dear and very close to my heart. Now, Herb, let me ask you.
Sure.
Why this renewed interest both in Malcolm and in the Panthers?
That's an interesting question. I think it has much to do with the kind of iconic wattage that Malcolm has, no doubt about it, across the ages, and the kind of commitment and dedication and the whole struggle motif with the Black Panther Party. Uh-huh. And they had certain kind of the icons there, Huey Newton, Bobby Seale, and to some extent Eldridge Cleaver. Mm. You had these here very prominent individuals there who commanded the headlines of newspapers. Mm. So once you get to the headlines of the American dailies, right, to say nothing of television, of course now the social media and the internet, once you have that kind of celebrity, it automatically gives you a certain prominence and a certain reputation out there and publicity. People know about you. Mm. And in knowing about you, then films are made, then the books are written, and that just further accentuates, this kind of reputation, this celebrityhood that you've acquired. Yeah. So I think it has much to do with also they have to establish in their lifetime, because we are talking about Huey Newton, who's no longer with us, and Malcolm X, of course, was taken away from us. Mm-hmm. So they're part of the ages.
Right.
And in being part of the ages, we've had the Spike Lee film. Uh-huh. You mentioned earlier the autobiography of Malcolm X, right, and that's established him from a global standpoint. Everybody now knows about who he is, or should know. Okay. There's so much to be said. And certainly about the Black Panther Party, the kind of a place they've established in African American history and culture. Right. It goes without question. And of course, the current film out there is a documentary by Stanley Nelson that's receiving a lot of attention, a lot of coverage, and a lot of praise too. So I think what we would do then is that how do we hook these two elements up? The legacy of Malcolm X and the legacy of the Black Panther Party. When and where do they meet? How do they connect? And how do we see a continuum, you know, from the struggle that Malcolm waged right down to what Black Panthers did in picking up on where he left off. So he says you look for those kind of connective tissue, you know, with both these elements. So you start with Malcolm, right? You start with Malcolm. And you talk about someone who, one of the books I brought with me is By Any Means Necessary. And we call it subtitle Malcolm X Real, Not Reinvented. When this is a response to Manning Marable's book that he did. You know, that really got a lot of attention, didn't it?
Okay.
And I worked with Dr. Ron Daniels, Dr. Maulana Karinga, and Dr. Hakeem Madhubuti. This is a Third World Press production. And it came out, you know, right behind, almost within a year of Manning Marable's book. Manning, we lost, he never even got a chance to see his book out there because he died a couple of days before the book was really released internationally. But nonetheless, you know, the ideas he had there kind of infuriated a whole collection of prominent activists and Black intellectuals and academics. So what I did was, you know, Bob, I read about 75 reviews of Manning's book. And I got together with Dr. Daniels and Dr. Karinga and Dr. Madhubuti, and after we went through all of these reviews, and most of them were pretty negative, and you can see the lineup, some 35 activist scholars here, male and female, old and young, who have responded, and we collected all their reviews and sometimes commissioned essays to respond to some of the criticisms that they had about Manning Marable's book. For example, he had proposed that he was going to deliver Malcolm, that Malcolm, you know, had this homosexuality, that he had cheated on his wife. You know, these are some very, very strong assertions. And so we say that certainly he was talking about humanizing Malcolm, but Malcolm didn't need any humanizing. You know, he was human enough as he was. All you have to do is read the autobiography.
That's correct.
And certainly the Diary of Malcolm X, too, is another project I worked on with one of his daughters, Ilyasa El-Shabazz. But anyway, so you have Malcolm, and not to deal too much with what Manning had to say, but mostly what these authors have pulled together here. And it stands as a testament in terms of his legacy and strongly supports, you know, all that he stood for. If you go back to the autobiography and look at the speeches that he left behind, you know, the whole Ballad of the Bullet, the last message, to say nothing, the message from the grassroots, all of these outstanding speeches. You know, Malcolm has established himself beyond any interpretation. Certainly, when you have a number of very, very outstanding people speaking to his legacy, from Mumia Abu-Jamal to Ta-Nehisi Coates. Of course, Ta-Nehisi Coates is getting a lot of play out there today. So it's mostly people who are concerned that Manning misrepresented Malcolm X.
I would say so.
Yeah, you know,
I would say so.
He was not, he says in his title, reinvented. We took exception with that concept right away. You know, anyway, we talk about an ever-evolving Malcolm. And right to the end of his life, you know, he was still discovering elements of struggle out there that needed to be really put before the world, to put it in a world perspective, in a global perspective.
You know what I don't like? I'll tell you what I don't like. And I hate to attribute something malicious to anyone unless I have it, you know, pen and paper.
Yes.
But what I don't like the way certain forces always try to make it like there's some kind of competition between Malcolm and Martin.
Oh, okay.
I don't like that. I really don't.
Sure.
That's like, when I was a kid doing Vietnam, I was in the Army, okay, when I was 17. Later on, I later went in the Navy in my very early 20s.
You did the Army and the Navy, huh?
Yeah, I was...
and what, Air Force or the Marines?
No, Army Reserve.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Yeah,
you have to do 6 years there, huh?
Yeah, I did. I did quite a bit. But I guess I have a mental lax or something like that. I'm a masochist. But but one thing, that's the thing that they try to do with Martin and Malcolm. It's like, well, which one was the best?
Oh.
That's like you have an Army and a Navy, or you have a Navy and a Marine Corps. It's all the same.
Sure.
But we're just doing the job in a different manner.
It's armed forces.
Right, and that's the way I see Malcolm and Martin. And I think, I'm going to get in trouble now. I think that with the deterioration of the Black Panther Party, I honestly believe that is one of the causes that I attribute to the decline in Black American manhood. I believe that that's why, and my son and his buddies, we argue back and forth about this quite a bit, but that's how I call it, because the things that we do now in the community, that transpire in the community, if we still had that image of the Panthers and what they truly stood for in the community, I don't think these young brothers, from the 80s up until now, the things that we have been doing to each other, I don't think that would happen. I'm sorry, I just don't think so.
You certainly are entitled to your opinion on that and feelings about that. I think what happens here, and it's a very complicated, it's not an easy subject to discuss, certainly with the limited amount of time we have here.
Exactly.
Because there's so much to go through, and then tons of books out there, and scholars have tussled with the image and the legacy of the Black Panther Party.
Yeah.
One of the things we have to understand is that they were underdogs in a very righteous struggle. Right. They had a righteous cause.
Yes, they did.
We can always argue about strategy and tactics, and of course that is hindsight. If you're caught up in that struggle, you're trying to make sense out of a reality that was very, very treacherous, at that time. But what we want to do here is to see, how do we connect Malcolm and the Black Panther Party? What are some of the commonalities that they have?
Let me hold this up.
Hold that up, sure.
Yeah, for the camera here. That's the Black Panthers for beginners. I
for
like
beginners,
that.
Right.
For beginners.
Yes.
Okay. And of course, my dear heart here, Brother Malcolm. Okay. By any means necessary, make sure we got that there. I want folks to see that. I'm going to buy this. I'm going to try and pick this up.
Yeah, thank you.
Probably right out there on 125th Street. And I'll be out there next week.
It's a couple places where they're out there available on the corner of 145th and St. Nicholas. There's a newsstand there that you can pick up all my books. I usually keep a Simeon story on the whole Emmett Till situation, as well as the Diary of Malcolm. You can get at least 4 of my books there on the corner.
Oh, okay.
So what common themes? You raise one in terms of the kind of negative aspects, where people maybe pick up the wrong message, from the Panthers, and how that led to a certain kind of demise, and set us back in terms of the overall struggle for self-determination. Yeah. Well, one of the hookups is that Malcolm was all about self-defense.
Yes.
So one of the myths you have to quickly dismiss is the notion that he was a man who was promulgating violence. So we kind of dispense with that and put it in the mode of self-defense. In other words, you attack me, then I defend myself.
Exactly.
Okay, so he's assassinated Bob, in 1965,
Right.
in February the 21st in Washington Heights, in Audubon Ballroom, much of that has been documented, recorded, and people need to cement it in their DNA.
Yeah.
But, okay, so in 1965, he's gone. Here come the Black Panther Party. Huey Newton and Bobby Seale at Merritt Junior College out in West Oakland, California.
Right.
They put their heads together after going through some kind of dissatisfaction with the current movements that was then apparent, certainly NAACP, even the Revolutionary Action Movement, you know, Robert Williams and people like that. They figured they were not moving fast enough, not with the kind of promptness and alacrity that they desired. So they put their heads together and came up with the Black Panther Party for self-defense.
Boom.
Oh,
exactly.
There's a connection right away in terms of self-defense. Now, they did that in October of 1966.
Right.
So it's a little bit over a year, probably a year and a half, you know, after Malcolm's assassination. Yeah. So right away, they're trying to pick up and carry on. And they talk about Malcolm. Bobby Seale in his book, Seize the Time, they talk about how they admired, you know, Malcolm X and what he stood for.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, they didn't gather some of the weaknesses, you know, around Malcolm at that point. Take, for example, if you're saying that Malcolm had an open organization, you could walk in off the street and become a member of the OAU, the Organization of African American Unity, right? They created after he left the Nation of Islam.
Yeah.
Same thing with the Panthers. People could just walk off the street. You being a military man, you know exactly what it means. Somebody come off the street and say, I can break down an M1 or M16 blindfolded and say, okay, you're the Minister of Defense.
Right.
You know?
Right.
So, you know, you have, in other words, an open door policy. It's a mass-based organization, so it's vulnerable and for penetration, for people coming in there and spreading all kind of mischief. In other words, the agent provocateurs. And people come in there, and Malcolm was a victim of the same thing. In fact, you can look at one individual. One individual.
Go ahead, say it.
We name some names.
Go ahead. No.
Gene Roberts. You ever hear of him?
Yeah.
Gene Roberts.
Yeah.
He was supposedly a bodyguard for Malcolm.
Oh, boy.
Right, but he was an undercover cop, right?
That's right.
He was a BOSS man, the Bureau of Special Services, NYPD.
That's correct.
His job was to penetrate the organization, which he did. And Malcolm never knew that he represented the enemy in so many ways.
Now,
you know?
let me ask you something.
Sure.
I've heard some things about that, okay? I'm going to ask you, what did Roberts, because I've heard different things. I want you to tell us here today. What did Roberts have to say after all that was done? After the assassination, what have you? How did he feel about what he was, paid to do, and what did he feel about the results of the aftermath
that's a good question,
Malcolm
Bob.
being taken from us?
And we had, and I raised the same question to a couple of my comrades out there. And being a journalist, you know, I went to answer that question. I went looking for Gene Roberts, and I found him, and I interviewed him for Class magazine. It must have been 1990 that I interviewed him, maybe 1989, 1990. And I was writing for Class magazine. It's no longer around. It was later became the Black Diaspora. This is where Renee John Sandy was the publisher. And he gave me a lot of leeway to do what I wanted to do in terms of stories. And I told him, I said, I think I can go get Gene Roberts on record and have him talk about his relationship. Because I had seen photos when Malcolm was gunned down. There's 3 or 4 people gathered around his body at that time. And one of them, of course, is Yuri Yokoyama. I don't know if you know Kochiyama. Yuri Kochiyama. She was there. In fact, Malcolm's head was in her lap.
That's right.
It was in her lap. Betty was off to the side. but she'd already shielded the children, you know, because she had 4 children with her.
Right.
And she was pregnant with the twins when all this happened.
Uh-huh.
Gene Roberts is, he's coming over on the other side, but eventually he gives him mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. That may be enough to kill Malcolm right there, you know. But anyway, he's trying to revive Malcolm. And then you see him pull back. You know, there's a series of photos on this. There's no video that we have, that we know of. Because Herman Ferguson, the late Herman Ferguson, he told me in an interview, and also it's a part of his autobiography, Unlikely Warrior, and he talks about seeing a flash, because he was there when Malcolm was gunned down in the Audubon Ballroom, and he said he saw like a yellow flash, indicating that maybe the thing was being videoed. So it may be somewhere out there, some film footage showing the actual assassination we've never seen. All we see is them coming out of the Audubon Ballroom with Malcolm on a gurney on his way to the hospital at Columbia Presbyterian Hospital at that time.
That's correct.
So anyway, back to Gene Roberts. So I caught up with Mr. Roberts, and we talked about a number of things, because we have to understand that once he had infiltrated into this organization here, Malcolm is dead and gone. His next assignment is the Black Panther Party. So I had a kind of a double concern in terms of his role with Malcolm and his role with the Black Panther Party, particularly the Panther 21 trial that went down, because that's when Dhoruba Ben Wahab, you know, Richie Moore called him the electronic nigger for his role in terms of infiltrating the party and disclosing all this information about the Panthers to the law enforcement officials at that time and then during the trial. All of that spelled out in a book by Murray Kempton called The Briar Patch. You know, it was well documented there. But anyway, so I asked Gene, I say, Gene, because another one of the concerns was to what extent the FBI, J. Edgar Hoover, and the whole COINTELPRO, the counterintelligence program, you know, was involved in the assassination of Malcolm X. You know what he told me? He says that we'd already, and Gene Roberts was just one of several undercover agents who did not know each other.
I'm sure.
That's amazing. But anyway, he told me, he says, we had already kind of penetrated the organization to the extent that, hey, I'm his principal bodyguard. They knew everything that he was doing. He said Malcolm meant more to them alive than dead. He was already, they knew exactly everything he was doing and whether or not he presented a threat in any way, and all that information was being divulged, you know, to their superiors. So they knew every move he was making. He was being, not only in terms of their penetration, but the taping, the FBI files that Claiborne Carson did, give you detailed information on day-to-day activities of Malcolm X. So and then by this time, one of the understandings we have about Gene Roberts in terms of how devastated he was, because he did express all his admiration, you know, for Malcolm, how much he really loved Malcolm, and he grew to admire him beyond and despite, you know, the assignment that he had. Beside
the job.
Exactly, and of course it led him to alcoholism.
I bet it would.
But that's going to be like an accumulative thing, because then after he leaves Malcolm, then he penetrates the Black Panther Party. So the point though here, Bob, is that if these young people were somewhat aware of the history that had happened here, perhaps they could have guarded against Gene Roberts. They would perhaps have known of him, but that information wasn't widely disseminated. You know, it only became kind of known about 10 years later that they would have known who Gene Roberts was, that he could move from one assignment to another. And of course, that's how those agents did it. Even when we did the Diary of Malcolm X, we discovered who one of the undercover CIA agents or FBI agents was that had been shadowing Malcolm all during, in 1964, when he traveled to North Africa and the Middle East. So we know how furtive they can move, you know, within the precincts of the so-called movement, you know, moving from one organization, institution, from one group, from one individual to another, and disclosing that information back to their superiors.
Well, to what's the proper phrase nowadays? In the sake of transparency, I have to admit to you that you know, I'm quite sure that our paths have crossed in the past. I was raised in Harlem activism and in Harlem politics.
Okay.
And this is the truth. As a Republican. But you have to remember, that was a different Republican Party
Oh my goodness.
at that time.
You go back to Lincoln, huh?
Yeah, damn near.
Some of my
Damn
students
near.
think I know Frederick Douglass, but anyway.
I like that. But my dad was the district leader in West
right.
Harlem
Okay.
back in the, what was that, very early 60s.
What
I'm
was
talking
his
about
name?
Walter Gumbs.
Okay.
Walter Ed Gumbs.
Okay.
He was the guy back in, I think this would be about 52, because he ran for the assembly then. And he was, okay, when, what's that boy's name? I shouldn't call him a boy, he was an old man by that time.
Yeah, right.
Harriman.
April Harry.
Yeah, when he was governor, right.
Mm-hmm.
And he was campaigning. And Huey and Jack was with Harriman that night, going all through Harlem, right?
You mean Hulin?
Yeah, Huey Jack. I always mispronounce it.
yeah,
I
yeah.
went to school with his daughter.
Oh, yeah.
St. Thomas the Apostle on 118th Street.
Right. I've
Yeah, we were in the
interviewed
same
her.
class.
I've interviewed her.
Yeah,
Right,
yeah. And what happened, my dad was the poll captain, okay? I forgot what street it was on, but he was the poll captain. And as Jack stepped in with Harriman in tow, I want you to meet the next governor of New York. You know, my old man stands right up, you can't come in here, like that. The Daily News has that picture.
Wow. Okay.
The Amsterdam News, they got like, because, you know, unfortunately, we were the last ones to get there, cover it, right?
Okay.
But yeah, that was a huge thing at that time in Harlem. And then when Malcolm came on the scene, you know, I used to think Malcolm might have been my mom's secret lover, because, you know, all the women in Harlem, they were Malcolmites. Okay. Yeah. And that scene in Spike's movie, where you got the situation where they got the brother down in the police basement, and he's been beaten.
Oh, yeah.
And Malcolm goes to make sure that, you know, hey, they don't kill this guy down here.
Yes.
And then when he comes back out and he orders the Fruit of Islam to march up with them, my old man was there.
Wow, okay.
And the day that he was going to speak, and when he got assassinated, my mother and myself, because she had, I forgot, she had tickets or whatever, but we were supposed to be there. I wasn't supposed to be in school that day. And the night before, my old man comes home and he tells my mom, he says, look, Maddie, tomorrow, you and the kid, you ain't going up there, okay, because it might not be safe.
My goodness.
Because apparently the word was out on the Vine. But see, what's so tragic, another thing that's very tragic about that to me, is that everybody was talking about, yeah, it's Elijah Muhammad and his boys, okay? I know, I can feel it, and I know it, that this thing was far more than just the in-the-scene fracas between Malcolm and the nation. It was much bigger than that, okay? I tried to do as much research on that as I could when I was in the Navy.
Oh, okay.
And what's that got to do with anything? Well, when I first went in the Navy, my first job, I was a yeoman, admin guy on an aircraft carrier, a nuclear aircraft carrier, the Nimitz. And I was doing that I was there for 3 years, and then I re-enlisted, and I said, well, I want to go to D.C. And I wound up having to go through a security clearance, which took about a year. And I wound up, make a long story short, I had a cosmic top secret clearance, and I was assigned to the White House and to the Pentagon, attached to DIA, which is the Defense Intelligence Agency.
Wow. Okay.
The military side of CIA.
It's a spook who sat by the door.
Yeah, to a point, that's exactly what happened. That's
Right.
exactly what happened. And, you know, that's why when you talk about how they infiltrated Malcolm
Sure.
and the Panthers, you know, I know exactly
The whole process.
what that was all about.
Yes.
Yeah. And this was something huge. And I can tell you this, that one of the biggest preoccupations, you know, dovetailing right into this conversation here, the first 2 weeks I was at the Pentagon and the White House. My job was to go to class. And I'm an enlisted guy. I'm like, at the time, I'm a petty officer third, which is like a corporal, okay? And I'm surrounded by high-ranking federal civilians, flag officers, like generals, admirals, okay?
Yes.
And I'm the only guy there. It was about 35 people in the class. The main emphasis for the first week was the civil rights movement.
Okay.
Why? Because of Malcolm, because of the Panthers, because of what's his name, the big mouth sheriff in Alabama?
Oh, Bull Connor.
Bull Connors,
Yeah.
okay,
Yeah.
and the things that he did to
Yes.
the right to vote marchers and that sort of thing, and the pictures that were taken. You have to remember these things with Malcolm, with the Panthers, with the Klan, Bull Connors, all that.
Yes.
This was being seen on nightly news around the world.
Oh, yes.
See, and people need to understand that. And we were taught, we had two teachers. One was an old hand OSS guy. And as you probably know, OSS was the forerunner of the CIA.
Yeah.
The other guy was an old retired State Department hand. And basically they were telling us that it was a life and death struggle to basically win the hearts and minds of the world of color. Southwest Asia, East Asia, Africa, Latin America, and that therefore civil rights was not just something that, you know, basically something nice and cute,
Yes.
but that it was basically a decisive part to what America would be able to do overseas.
Man.
Because one cat said something to the effect that we would never truly be able to rise to the level of being a real empire, okay, with, you know, making our mandate known around the world and be able to enforce it as long as there was any vestige of legal segregation. See? And I thought about that.
Yes.
And I would just sit there, I'd ask a few questions. I was fortunate. You know, that whole 2 weeks, I never had to buy lunch. Not once. I was the only black guy in there.
Yes,
You know?
right.
And it was cool. I'm sitting at the table with generals and admirals,
Yes.
you know, assistant secretaries of state. You know, because when you first get into that world, you have to go to that class.
You should really consider a book.
Yeah, a couple of people have told me that.
Yeah, you really should, because that provides us another aspect, a whole fresh perspective, you know, on how that thing operates. Joint Chiefs of Staff, the Pentagon, the Defense Department, Council of Foreign Relations, you know, you're right up in there. You're in the mix. So we can begin to recount, you know.
Yeah, it was, sometimes it was frightening.
Did you ever keep a diary at all, or any of those experiences?
Sometimes I would write notes. My beautiful young wife passed away at a very early age, right after she turned 36. But I used to drive her up the wall because I would happen. She would see something on the. I would come home, something would happen. She saw it on the news, and then she would start pumping me with 50 questions, and I would just sit there and kind of smirk. And she said, "You know all about it, don't you?"
Right.
You know, like that, right? And then maybe later on, after the event happened, I would be able to tell her about it. You know, but there are things that came under my purview.
Yes.
That I still have bad dreams about.
Yes.
I tell people, America is not a perfect country.
Yes.
Far from it.
Yeah.
And we've done some bad things.
Well, that's what Malcolm was trying to say, you know, toward the end of his life.
Yeah.
In terms of raising these issues, in terms of the American empire.
Yeah.
American dollarism, as he called it. Remember that?
Oh, God. Yeah.
American dollarism. And I think the whole international and the global perspective that he was beginning to really apply, and that analysis, you know, made him a larger target, no doubt about it.
Yes,
you know, he was.
It did.
He started to dabble and dip into things that. This is one thing about domestic policy, and a whole nother issue about
he started
foreign
going
policy.
international.
Yeah,
that was
right,
it.
right. I mean, he becomes like a global figure, and then you're moving through Africa, and you're talking to all of these major leaders. You know, the presidents of their country. So you like the president of Black America. No, he's like the president of Black America, a minister without portfolio. I mean, he's moving with Kwame Nkrumah.
Oh, you have no idea.
Oh,
you have no idea. I've read some of the comments deep in the file about he really shook them up.
Oh, no doubt.
He really
no doubt,
did.
You know,
I'll say one thing. I mean, if they want to try and hang me with the Security Act, they can go ahead. You know, who you think the powers that be were most afraid of? Nelson Mandela in South Africa, the whole South African thing? No, they had a lot of respect. Now, I'll give them credit. They had a lot of respect for Nelson.
Sure.
But they were terrified of his wife, Winnie.
Right.
Oh, man, she kept them up at night.
Well, that's a whole nother issue in terms of looking at, when you start looking at the globalized black world, you know, the diaspora.
Yeah, but see, like I tried to tell
the international
people,
thing was right here with the Black Panthers, too, because that's another connective aspect in terms of the global, particularly after Cleaver and a few of his crew are now settled in Algiers.
Let me ask you something. Do you think, I was talking to somebody, about a couple of weeks ago, and discussions come up from time to time. Do you see Barack Obama as part of that, how should I say, that these folks
the continuum.
A continuum,
yes.
that these folks helped us to go from what they were about to having Barack Obama first knowing black president of the United States?
Oh, it's been that is an interesting question that's been raised and tossed around by a number of so-called black public intellectuals who grapple with that. And you have differing views on that. If you look at, for example, Peniel Joseph in his book, two of his books, the first one, Wait Till the Midnight Hour, which is very, very good. And of course, the one he did on the Black Power and the Obama, and he makes that particular thesis. He puts that thesis out. And of course, there was a lot of pushback on that from people saying, no, you can't connect Obama, you know, with this whole surge of black nationalism, Pan-African thought, the self-determination that was coming from Malcolm, from the Panthers, and of course, the black liberation struggle itself. I would think that there may not be, Bob, a direct, not in a kind of a lineal progression. It's hard to kind of pose that, you know, and so it's very, very problematic to see a kind of a straight line progression moving from Malcolm to Obama, you know. However, indirectly, because you have to take into consideration all of the perturbations that we've had, you know, in our culture in terms of the political aspirations. It's like going back, you said earlier, you don't like the whole idea of the competition, Dr. King and Malcolm.
Right.
And we can talk about the confluence of their ideas. the kind of the ideological things that they were putting out there, the political philosophy that they represented, and how it was coming closer and closer together, certainly from an international standpoint, because Malcolm was already there, where Dr. King had arrived, toward the last, the speech he gave a year before his assassination at the Riverside Church, where he began to kind of really jump on him about the war in Vietnam.
I was in the fifth row.
You were in the fifth row of that one, right?
Yeah, my mother dragged me up there because I didn't want to go.
Oh man,
yeah, that's right.
So see, that's what I'm saying. That's in you. That's in you. That's got to be part of the story that you'll tell one day through your book, or through your video, or through your documentary that you'll make about, the legacy, the odyssey, of Bob Gumbs. There has to be, you're telling it right now with your show. I'm sure that people are watching this now and saying the same thing. Give us more, give us more. Tell us a little bit more about some of those incidents, your mother in particular, your father, who seemingly were very much involved, in the political experiences of the day, and so you have to tell their stories. We have to know who J. Raymond Jones in terms of the Harlem Fox.
Oh, God,
I'm
yes,
sure
yes.
Your father was connected with it. And the Gang of Four.
Yeah.
He probably, in some way, was bouncing in and around that whole Democratic crowd and some of the Republican crowd, too, back in the day, right?
That's correct.
So he knew all of these individuals, and certainly somewhere, I'm sure someone is, in some of the newspaper articles and magazine articles and some of the documentaries that we have about Harlem, certainly the stuff that Charles Green, who's a very fine historian, with Basil Wilson, and the books that they put together in terms of looking at the whole political evolution in the Harlem community and to some extent Brooklyn. So all of these things, these are some stories we have to tell. And you can see how this can spur, if you talk about the internationalism, if you talk about self-defense, if you begin to talk about the civil rights and the human rights struggle, and how that evolves into the Black liberation struggle, and how Black power then is a consequence of some of these developments right here. So all of that has to be thrown into the mix. And then we have to shape it and look at the form and the content of it and deliver it back to the people. We have that obligation, responsibility as communicators.
This is true.
So I would hope that one day you find the time to kind of put some of this stuff down and put your proposal together, do a sample chapter, and approach some of the agents out there and get your book out there, because you have a story to tell. I was listening to you talking about the whole experience, for example, in the Navy. The first person that came to mind was Alex Haley. Because of the whole Coast Guard experience that he had. That eventually, through Reader's Digest and all the articles that he did, he worked his way right onto Malcolm. So here he is working with Malcolm on his autobiography. So you can never see the kind of trajectory of these lives and where they lead to, the experience you had, in the Navy. Kind of like, I'm carrying on the tradition of Dory Miller, the great hero of World War II, who was killed, So, because we don't hear enough about blacks in the Navy. We don't hear enough about blacks in the Marine. We just lost Frank Peterson, who was the first, a Marine black pilot.
That's correct.
People know the Tuskegee Airmen.
They don't know about that.
They don't know about him and Jesse Brown, for example, who was shot down
in
before
Korea.
him.
That's correct.
In Korea,
That's
exactly.
correct.
So you know the military history too, don't you? So that's another story
story
we have to know about the kind of courage and dedication, the sacrifice we made, because if you understand the United States, there's not one war they waged out there in which we were not critical. All the way back to the Revolutionary War.
We're going to have to, you're
That's
right.
a whole nother subject, but it begins to talk about where we contextualize the black experience within the whole evolution of the United States.
How do we take this here, though, and in this present political climate? Okay, because I will tell you, I would like to see the books like these. I would like to see it as part of a resurrection, a badly needed resurrection in the black community, because I tried, and maybe I sound like a town crier, but I am very, very concerned about the direction that I see the politics in this country going.
Oh, yes.
And
yes.
I look and I see what I feel is almost an embryonic new nationalistic Nazi type movement. Okay, being a part of this new Republican Party, and I feel that we need to resurrect these memories in the community to basically put our folks, especially our young folks, saying, yeah, they stood up to the issues that they had at their time. We need to emulate that.
That's a good point, Bob.
And stand up to these people now. My God, there are even, police across this country have even been killing black women.
I mean,
in modern times.
And that's, it's been, the point was raised, a similar point, in terms of the Black Panthers, Selma, that film Selma, what's happening with 2 or 3 other documentaries out there to begin to kind of bring up those points again and show the connection.
Right.
They put Selma and the Black Panthers and stuff out there, and how it connects up with Black Lives Matter. Yeah. And the whole issue of police brutality across the country. Right. So in other words, there's absolutely nothing new, in terms of the relationship struggle in the black community with the law enforcement agencies. And so I mean, that's a good point in terms of how, you can have these films out here and have these books out here, and then you look and see the current situation, and how does that dovetail? How do these things dovetail? And how can it be a teaching moment? How can we grab that? Like, for example, I teach at City College. Today, this being a Saturday, I teach every Saturday at City College. Of course, I teach in the fall is called The History of the Civil Rights Movement. What I showed them today was 2 segments from Eyes on the Prize. 2 segments from Eyes on the Prize. One, the whole Albany, the whole demonstrations in Albany, which grew out of, what had happened in Montgomery, the boycott of 1955, 381 days of that struggle, to say nothing about Little Rock in 1957, the sit-in of 1904 in Greensboro, North Carolina in 1961, right down to the March on Washington in 1963. So they saw 2 segments. And one of the students was saying that, watching those water holes, you talk about Bull Connor, in Birmingham, and the dogs, the German shepherds, tearing off their clothes and everything, and the water hoses smashing them up against the trees and up against the wall and everything. And people say, my goodness, Eric Gardner, my goodness, Michael Brown, my goodness, Freddie Gray, Walter Scott down in North Charleston, and on and on and on in terms of the contemporary things. And of course, you and I being here in New York, we have seen a retinue of those things going all the way back. We can go back to the Reverend Herbert Daughtry was telling me some stories, long before I arrived in this community and the struggles they were conducting there against police brutality. And of course, if you go back to the 1960s, James Baldwin talked about what happened with James Powell, the whole Harlem 6 situation here in terms of what was the brutalization of black youth and unarmed young black men, being shot down by the police. And when we the Amadou Diallo, you know, we can begin to point out what happened with Abner Louima in terms of the torture that he had to undergo. You dig it? So we have those experiences. So you have these films, these documentaries out there that are really looking into the deep past. They're going back to the 1960s, right?
Yeah.
Malcolm, going back, Selma, 1965, the march from Selma to Montgomery.
Yeah.
But it's new and fresh. When Amelia Boynton Robinson, who was 104 years of age when she died, three or 4 weeks ago, and she was that kind of a testament, a milestone, a beacon, a sentinel, in that a real foot soldier in the struggle. And what happened to her? We still have a few of them. I mean, we lost Julian Bond, but we still got a few of them around who have those memories that we need to capture, and their stories need to be told. We've got a lot of work to do on that. You know, Fred Shuttlesworth, I mean, people still, you know, C.T. Vivian, you know, understanding who James Bevel, Diane Nash, you know, John Lewis, who's still with us.
Yeah.
You know, so all of these here foot soldiers out of the civil rights movement, to say nothing of those who were part of the Black Panther Party, who are political prisoners now.
Yeah.
Last week, I do a classroom thing in the Amsterdam News each week where I pick out one of our kind of unheralded individuals in our history and culture, people we need to know a little bit more about. And I focused on Safia Bukhari. You know, she was a former Black Panther, and we lost her to cancer. But, you know, just my students, I ask them to pick up the Amsterdam News each week and profile an individual out of the civil rights movement or an incident or any story that has any kind of connection to the civil rights movement. 3 papers came in on Safia Bukhari. You know, so I said, oh, they're picking up. You know, they see exactly there's a connection between the civil rights movement and the continuum that the Black Panther provided. Because they had some programs in there that are very, very critical programs. And in terms of the free breakfast programs for the children.
That was the biggest. You know, I tell people that the way that in various parts of the country, the way that the Panthers were attacked and literally assassinated, none of that really started happening until these brothers started feeding hungry kids.
Exactly.
So what should that tell us?
And the liberation schools.
Yeah.
And the medical clinics.
Exactly.
So,
the things that help the community.
Exactly.
After they started doing that, that's when their lives became at risk.
Yes.
Why?
Well, you have to see, and then at the same time, though, Bob, you had the municipalities that picked up on those programs because they weren't doing those things. And so they got the lessons, the initiative coming from the Panthers, and they could commandeer and expropriate the ideas without any attribution.
Yeah.
They never gave the Panthers any credit for that.
Yeah.
You know,
Let me, as our time slowly runs down, let me ask you something else, too. Keeping these in mind, what should the Black community, how should we look at American politics today?
Well, I think, first of all, we have to be a part of that conversation. And you can't be, we used to have an expression coming out of the 60s, no investigation, no right to speak. So you have to get informed, and that's one of the things about the American electorate. We can never underestimate its ignorance. That's why you can have things like a Ben Carson and a Donald Trump, certainly anti-establishment, candidates, GOP candidates out there taking the lead. They're front runners.
I feel so sorry for Brother Bill. I really do. I passed, how should I say, I passed his space quite a few times when we were living in Baltimore. Not that he was doing all that much for the community, okay? I mean, I must say...
Because it was at Johns Hopkins.
Right, and at that time I was the secretary for the NAACP's Committee on Crime and Violence, dealing with young Black men. And I think there was a whole lot that he could have done, but everybody has their own time, their own schedules. But this was the guy that was being praised for, working himself up to become one of the world's greatest neurosurgeons.
Yes.
So how do you go? And I know I want to make myself unpopular again, but hey, the truth hurts. How do you go from being one of the top 7 neurosurgeons on the planet to being a blithering idiot? I don't understand that.
So what happened? Huh?
Yeah, what in the name of God is going on here? Because this guy...
Well, he should have stayed in the operating room.
I believe so.
Yeah, because now you're jumping into a whole different field.
Yeah.
In politics, if you don't know what you're doing there, you can quickly make a fool of yourself.
He has done that, especially in these last 2 weeks.
And say some absolutely ridiculous things out there, because you have to toe the line. He has a political party. He has to toe the line there. He hasn't deviated at all from that. As a matter of fact, he's taken a step further in terms of Black Lives Matter, the Muslim community. Those things, you don't have to say those kind of ridiculous things. However, if you do, and you notice that the money came in right after that too.
Yeah.
So he was
money from where?
It's just like Jeb Bush said in terms of, all the so-called free stuff that he said.
Yeah.
All you're doing is like, in a very calibrated way, playing to the choir. You're singing to your choir because I need to get the conservative vote. I gotta be. It's like being tough on crime.
Exactly. Now, maybe you can tell me now why. When was it? Yesterday, the day before, Lynn Swann came out giving Jeb Bush his support.
Oh yeah. Well, you have these people like Kanye West, coming out for Donald Trump.
Yeah.
Well, some kind of way there's a payoff that we know nothing about. And it's just one celebrity praising another celebrity.
That's so sad.
That's all it is.
That's so sad.
We'll see exactly how it plays out with the first primaries and really the first important debates. And I'm interested in the Democratic race.
Yeah, I was getting ready to ask you about that.
And Clinton. We'll see how that plays out.
Yeah.
I'll come back and do another show.
Oh, you will?
Let's talk about the elections next time.
Yes, indeed.
Okay,
now,
thank you, Bob.
Tell me something.
Sure.
One more thing before you go. Looking in your crystal ball.
I've got my tea leaves working here.
What do you see? Just talking about here in New York, for example. What do you see for the future in the community of color?
In the community of color, oh my goodness, we have some issues going on right now as we speak. Just the other day, in terms of Abyssinian Baptist Church, they have to look into issues like that in terms of the treasured institutions that we have. The whole question of gentrification, is something that's critical, for some homeowners, where I live in Harlem, for example, and certainly in Brooklyn. What does it mean? Are we being priced out of our own community? So you have to look at it from the standpoint of the foundation, the base. What's happening with the base? Because if the base falls apart, all of the superstructure aspects, they crumble. They're kind of like inconsequential. You got to solidify the base, and that's our cultural base, which I think is pretty solid at this point. I mean, people coming in, it's like ancient Egypt.
Yeah.
All the invaders that came into Egypt, they were absorbed by the Egyptian culture. They didn't overturn it, it absorbed them. Harlem absorbs all of these invaders, but at some point, you can have what you call environmental constipation or environmental, indigestion, because you're taking in so many of these things and you're in no position to kind of deal with the mixture of cultures that are coming in. And they're coming in so fast. It's almost like the refugee situation as we look at it in Europe.
Okay, yeah, that's a very good...
what we should understand, Bob, is the connection between the domestic policies and the foreign policies. Malcolm and the Panthers gave us some indication of that. As they moved out there on the international sphere. And we learned a lot of lessons from both the mistakes they made and the advances that they made. And that's where the analysis comes in, as you begin to have a dialectic approach and see the strengths and weaknesses of Malcolm and the Black Panther Party. That'll probably give us some understanding of where we are today.
Well, Mr. Boyd, I am so sorry to say that it's our time here.
No, we're going to do it
almost
again.
over. We got to do it
Oh,
again.
yeah, I would
we
love
gotta. I have learned so much, and I am proud to say that I look upon you as one of my mentors.
Well, okay. Well, I won't charge you for that.
Okay, good. Good.
Free
Excellent.
consultation, you know.
I can use all the help I can get.
You're right.
And
But
I
I'll be
want to
back
thank you for
again.
being
No,
here.
it's been a pleasure. Hey,
Okay.
baby, you know, we're brothers now.
Okay.
You dig it? You got to tell your story a little bit more, though.
I'm going to.
I want you to.
Listen, we good now, right, Fred?